Welcome to Cordell and Cordell's Men's Divorce Podcast, bringing you information for guys before, during, and after divorce, and everything related to family law. This podcast is not to be taken as legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is established.
All right, welcome to the Men's Divorce Podcast. My name is Jason Lasser. I'm a management partner with the firm. I practice out of our Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania office. I've been with the firm going on 14 years, all out of the Pittsburgh office. Practice is limited to Pennsylvania. Our discussion topic today is legitimation, which is unique to Georgia law. I am not licensed in Georgia. We have similar legitimation issues in Pennsylvania. We call them legal custody or just custody. And if you have questions on that, you can schedule a consultation with our Pittsburgh or Philadelphia office, and we can review those issues with you. But today we're going to be focused mainly on Georgia and legitimation in Georgia. And I am joined today by my esteemed colleague, Alexis Coleman-Watkins, who is very well versed in the topic of legitimation. Alexis, introduce yourself for us, please.
Thanks so much, Jason. I'm happy to be here again. I'm Alexis Coleman-Watkins. I've been practicing in Georgia for almost 5 years, and I've been at the firm for a year now. I'm excited to talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about legitimation and fathers' rights.
Great. So why don't you tell me, who knows nothing about legitimation, what it is?
So legitimation is basically just allowing the biological father to have rights to their child.
And is that if a child is born to a marriage or if a child is born outside a marriage? How does that work?
This is when the child is born outside of a marriage, so outside of wedlock. In Georgia, when you have a child while you're married, that child is automatically deemed as legitimate. But if you have a child outside of wedlock, that child needs to be legitimized per the court system.
Okay. So how does the process work then?
So once a father usually walks into the door and says, "Hey, I have a child. I need to legitimize." And what we would do is file a petition with the court. Then we would move on to have the mother served. And then the parties sometimes will go through discovery just to figure out kind of where the parties are financially, what's going on with the child's background. Once discovery is done, either the parties can make some type of a negotiation to either consent to the legitimation. And if they're not able to consent, then the parties, a lot of courts will force them to mediation. And if they still can't get it done there, then the court will have a final hearing on the legitimation action.
Okay, just to back up a bit, because this is all new to me. So if I have a relationship with the mother of my child and we're not married, there when the child is born, I sign the birth certificate. Does that not mean that I have custodial rights to that child?
Yeah, unfortunately, you would not. In Georgia, that doesn't automatically give you custodial rights. What the court looks at when fathers do sign the birth certificate for their children, they say that would be prima facie evidence. So that'll kind of just get you in the door. But that doesn't, by in and of itself, say, okay, now you have legal rights to that child. You have to go through the formal process by filing a petition with the court to ask and seek an order of legitimation.
Okay. And so then what are the benefits of doing a legitimation other than the obvious one, which is seeing your child on a regular custody schedule or asking for custody of the child? What other benefits are there?
The main benefit, because the legitimation itself is just allowing the father to inherit from the child and the child to inherit from the father. So basically, the biological father is now deemed the legal father. So now if something were to happen to the father, the child can now inherit any assets the father had. In same scenario, if the child had any assets, the father could inherit from the child in that same manner. So that's what the legitimation just does in and of itself. But within the confines of the legitimation, you can also seek custody rights, and then child support can also be ordered, visitation and parenting time. So a lot of times fathers will come in and they are already seeing their children, but they're not doing so on a regular basis. And so the point of doing a legitimation is, one, to get the inheritance back and forth between the child and being deemed the legal father. But, mainly they want to make sure it's on paper that I can have my parenting time with my son or my daughter on a regular basis. I can take them where I want to take them, and I can have legal custody over them to where I can make decisions about their education and whatnot. So that's the biggest point and reason as to do that, because if you don't, reasonably, Georgia views fathers that have not legitimized their child as a stranger to the child. So there could be potential risk with being charged with kidnapping if you have the child in your possession and you don't really have legal rights to do so. There's a plethora of things that could go wrong if you don't go and get this legitimation order and everything taken care of.
Okay. So you can seek custody through a legitimation order, but it is not guaranteed.
That's correct. That's correct. It's not guaranteed because the court's going to look at what I think across the board, most states, the best interest of the child, because that's the standard the court will look at and say, okay, yes, you check the box, you're the biological father, but is this relationship best for the child? And so they go through the many factors that the courts will go through to see if this is a good relationship, making sure the father is stable, he has, good employment, the father doesn't have any abuse or substance abuse issues, there's not any severe, abandonment going on between the father and child. So, the court's going to look at a variety of factors to make sure that this is right for the child, that, for the father to be in the child's life. Otherwise, there's opportunities and instances where the court decides it's not in the child's best interest.
Okay. So if I was a client that wanted to establish legitimation and maybe even some custody time through the process, what tips would you have for me as to what I could be doing to put myself in the best situation to be successful with that sort of claim?
I often tell my dad clients when they come in, honestly, you want to document everything. Of course, when you're spending time with your child, you want it to be natural. But at the end of the day, if you're living in Georgia and you're aware or you become aware of the law and knowing that, hey, I have to eventually prove that, this is a good relationship and this is what's best for my child. I need to send my attorney photos of us having fun together. I need to send them videos of the child spending time with my family and my community and us doing things out in the community. I need to show the court maybe photos of where the child will stay overnight and say, okay, I have a room for them here and here's a play area for them, showing the court that, hey, I have space available for them. And then, making sure that your financial, setup is straight, like making sure, hey, I'm going to my job, I'm collecting, I have my taxes filed, I have my W-2s in order. I'm, keeping up with my paycheck stubs. I can download them and get them fast. Or if you're an entrepreneur, I'm making sure I'm doing a profit and loss statement or doing, making sure my bank statements all look in line, because the court's going to want to know that, hey, financially, can you, contribute to this child's life? Can you, when you have your time with them, can you afford to have that time? Can you take them for ice cream? Can you, can you do what's necessary to help the mother raise them? And because child support is usually going to get ordered in a legitimation if it's not already ordered.
Oh, well, that's a good point. So if let's say legitimation is not ordered, could I still be obligated to pay child support?
That's correct. That happens a lot. As far as mothers are allowed to file what is called an establishment of paternity. And so they often do that through the Department of Children's Services. We call it DCSS. They'll go down to DCSS and say, hey, I know who my child's father is. I know his address. I just haven't seen him and he's not cooperating on helping me out financially. And then the department, launches their pleadings and tries to serve the father. And sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Or if they do get service on the father may ignore the letters and the notices, and the department will just move on. If they've been served, they'll move on and they'll have a hearing and they will deem that person as the legal father, and they will be, at least in the confines of just support, and then they will be obligated to pay that support. But that does not mean that they have custodial rights or visitation rights or anything related to parenting time. It's just for the confines of child support.
Or even legal custody rights, or the
Or
ability.
even legal custody. There's,
Right.
you literally just are obligated to pay for the benefit of the child. There's nothing else given to you, usually at that point.
I would think a lot of guys that are paying child support would just think that alone would give them some sort of rights to their child. And from what it sounds like, you're telling me that's not even close to the case.
A lot of fathers do. They have no idea. You wouldn't believe the amount of clients that come in that say, I had no idea that I had to do this. I've been seeing my child for 5 years at this point. I was there when, they were born. I went to all the, my ex-girlfriend's appointments. I was there for their first birthday. I've done all this. And I've also been ordered to pay child support, and I've been on time every month. But you mean to tell me that I can't go pick them up from school, or I can't, take them to Florida to Disney World without it being an issue with the court system, or mom saying, that I'm kidnapping? And unfortunately, I have to say yes. And until we get this done, you're not allowed to do any of that.
Right. So what you're saying is a lot of times dads do have an active role by for lack of a better word, the grace of mother that allows them to see the child. And then something happens. Sometimes dad gets another girlfriend, or it's usually always generated by that, right? Dad gets another girlfriend, and then mom says, you know what? I'm not going to let you have him this weekend. I was being nice, and I'm not going to be nice anymore. So if that's a guy that comes to you, you say, yeah, sorry, you have 5 years of history doing this, but we got to go through this entire court process and get you legitimized. Is that the case?
That is correct. We're not gonna say that all that history is just nothing. It definitely counts. The court's going to take into consideration the relationship that you've already established, all the things that you've already been doing. That is going to bolster your point of getting the legitimation granted. But as far as, thinking that you'll go and get, that time back that mom basically told you can't have, sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. It just, sometimes the court take the position of, we can only provide what was ordered. And if that time was not ordered to you, we can't force the mother to give it back to you. So in the same confines and instances in some states, I don't know if y'all state is this way, but Georgia, there's no retroactive child support. So until the order is in place, you can't say, yes, you can reference history of he's always given me $100, but he stopped giving that to me. I want back child support. But if there was no real order in place, there's not really legally a avenue for you to get that. So that's the same thing. Like if you didn't really have a parenting plan order in place, you can't now ask the judge to force the mother to give you that time back. But a lot of times we do try to ask for makeup time, and the judges do, if they've seen the history, the judges tend to be lenient and say that, we understand there's been history here. We'll go ahead and give you makeup time for that. But it's not required.
Okay. You had talked about the payment of child support. Is that factored in? Is the father paying child support or lack of payment of child support factored in or considered at all in the legitimation process?
It definitely is. It definitely is. The court's going to view the payment of child support, even if it's not an official order. If you can prove that, hey, I sent her a check and you can see it zelling to my account for months and years and even though there wasn't an order, the court is going to consider that, especially if you can prove that through evidence, through your bank accounts, your Cash App statements. If you can prove that you've been sending the mother's money on a monthly basis, the court's going to consider that as you being availing yourself to that child, establishing that interest and that opportunity interest to that child. That court is going to view that as good. And it gives you a better chance to, for the legitimation to be granted. On the flip side, if you're not contributing to the child as far as financially, and you've never contribute to the child financially, the court sometimes will view that in a negative light, especially if you were aware of the child, you've been in the child's life, but you just have not contributed at all. That may be a negative as far as legitimation is concerned.
Wow, that's surprising to me because and this is probably a good time to bring this up. This is the difference in the laws in states, right? Every state is different because in Pennsylvania, we have separate custody and separate support, right? Like when we have a custody trial, we don't bring up anybody's payment of support. It doesn't even come up. If you bring it up, you get hollered at. And the same goes for support. They don't. Custody is a consideration for how much support you pay, but there isn't any sort of cross pollination on the topics in a trial. So just a good reminder that if you are listening and you're not in Georgia and you're thinking this sounds different or this applies to you, please contact an attorney in one of our offices in your state for a consultation, because this is one thing in particular where the laws can wildly vary on the consideration of paying support and its application to a custody or a legitimation process. Just to circle back on something you had mentioned earlier, can a mom object to a legitimation action?
Absolutely. The courts tend to, when a child is born out of wedlock, the court says that the biological father has an opportunity to, gain an interest in that child. So the court gives you that opportunity, but the court can also say you have abandoned that opportunity. So there are several factors the court's going to look at to say that, the father has either, took action on that opportunity or has abandoned that opportunity. And sometimes, the mother can say, again, he's never paid any support. He's been ordered to pay it and he never paid not 1 cent. Or I've asked him and I have records of me asking him via text to help me out with the child and he never did so. He's never. And then the court also considers how often you've had a relationship and seen the child. So if you've, been disconnected for the child for a certain amount of years, the court views that as you abandoning your opportunity interest to seek legitimation. The courts are very mixed on that. There's no hard and fast number. Some case law says 2 years without having a connection with the child is, something the court's going to consider. Some cases and courts have said 4 years. Others have said 10. So it varies across the board. There's no hard and fast. Well, once you get to this age, you've completely abandoned your interest. But the court is going to consider how much time it's been since the last time you've seen those children or your child. Have you supported them at all? Have you reached out to them at all? Have you made any type of connection, sent them anything, even if you weren't able to send them money? Did you try to send them a Christmas gift? Did you try to send them a birthday card? Did you write them a letter? Did you do anything to try to avail yourself? And if the mother has evidence to prove that you have not and witnesses to testify that you never have or have not, the court may side and state that the father cannot legitimize due to him abandoning his opportunity interests to that child.
All right. So just to tie a bow on that, there is no hard and fast deadline to say you need to act within, you need to have an action within 5 or 10 years. But there is a point where the court's going to say, you've waited too long. You can't come ask for custodial rights or legitimation rights at this point.
That's correct.
So act early and act often.
That's exactly what the courts intend and would like for the fathers to do, is just do it as fast as you can. Honestly, as soon as the baby is born, you want to start having those conversations. Fathers and mothers consent to legitimation all the time. It's really a super easy process. It doesn't take that long, especially if the parties are going to consent. They're going to be amicable. They can even, agree to no child support, agree to what, liberal parenting time. You can agree to whatever you want to. It's just in the confines of, if you don't have that order filed, whatever you and the mother may have agreed to off the record or just over the years, that can go down, proverbially the toilet if mom, is upset that weekend and it's just like, hey, I don't want you to see them. Like, yes, like you said earlier, Jason, if, dad gets a new girlfriend or a new wife, I don't want you going over there. I don't know that new wife. So you're not going. And, all the history that you've built could be broken. Same scenario of, if dad is, not paying anymore. Sometimes moms are, take the position of, oh, well, you're not paying, you don't get to see him. Now, granted, I will say the courts don't look at that favorably and will, come down on the mother about alienation. So if the mother, that's the defense to mom's claim of abandoning opportunity interest, is that mom did not allow me to. Because if that's the case, you can't say, oh, dad abandoned his interest. He never came around the child. Dad can come back and say, I tried, Your Honor. Here's all the text or emails of where I was asking to see the child and she denied me. So that happens a lot, is that mom will claim that the father has abandoned their interest, but in reality, mom has been the one wielding the torch and not allowing dad to see the child.
So when you go through a legitimation, is there a paternity test that's done through this process?
Yes, the court does require genetic and DNA testing. It's some cases where if the parties, just acknowledge, I know I'm the legal father and biological father, the courts will take that acknowledgement at face value. And sometimes even at birth, the paperwork that you sign for the birth certificate will include a paternity acknowledgement. And if dad signed that, the court will take that as enough evidence to prove that genetically you're putting yourself out to be connected to this child. But most courts, a lot of the judges are like, I want the genetic testing in the record. And so they will require the fathers and the children to take that test, and then results come back and then move forward from there.
What if the results say you are not the father?
That has happened, Jason. I've had a few cases where that has been the case. My father clients have been told for years that, one of my clients had 2 children. So he was told for years that both of the children were his, and he thought and, believed that they were his. He was a little suspicious because one didn't really favor him and the other one looked just like him. But at the end of the day, children can look like variant pieces of the puzzle, and they can look like an aunt twice removed and still be biologically your child. So he just took it as that. We went through the legitimation process. We filed, we served the mother. We got the DNA testing done for both children. One came back 99.9% his and the other 0. So in that scenario, we just asked, because of the fact that mom also made, certain claims that both of the children were his. She placed him on both, she asked for him to come to both births. He was on both birth certificates. She was asking for money for both kids. So she, led him to believe that both of them were his kids. And I think it came out that she was not really sure, or she kind of had an inkling that one of them wasn't. And so there's been times where we've asked for, at the very least, a lot of times the courts require the father to pay for the DNA test. And in this instance, we asked for the mother to reimburse him for the portion for the child that was not his. And so that's kind of the way we save it. Sometimes we even ask for, if it's just one child, we ask for attorney's fees, because you've, especially if you had knowledge that, the child really wasn't his, but you were just saying these things and making the father believe these things, and we can prove that you were lying. Sometimes the courts are willing to give attorney's fees because we've, went through this whole process basically for nothing.
This might open a whole nother can of worms and potentially a whole nother podcast, but in that situation, if you were acting as the father and you were told you were the father, you go through the let's say 5 years pass and you have to file for legitimation. Is there any sort of a parental estoppel that you can apply and say, well, I've held myself out to be the father, even though I'm not the bio father, I still want to be there for this child. Can you still get legal custody rights even if you're not the biological father?
Jason, I haven't seen it happen.
Okay.
I haven't seen it happen.
Yeah, we're talking about like the rarest of the rare cases. It just
right. That's super rare. The courts tend to want to save that for biologically connected parents. Okay. Just hadn't seen it happen yet.
Okay, great. All right. Just one procedural question on this. So what is a typical legitimation process? What's the timeline look like? How many months we talking here?
So if the parties are consenting, it's rather quick. Like, honestly, they can, mother can acknowledge service, they can sign a consent order, and honestly, it can be done in a matter of weeks. Typically, probably like at least a month to let the service pinned and things like that. But if the parties and it's going to be a contested issue, or we have to go through a lot to find the mom to serve her, not very long, maybe 6 to 9 months if it's, going the way it's supposed to go. Now, if it's a case where the father is looking to gain primary physical custody, which is having the kids on a more full-time basis, that may take longer, especially if it's highly contested. Sometimes that can take some years.
Okay. So you could actually use the legitimation process to ask for primary custody, meaning the majority of the time?
That's correct. I've done it. And it's very, very sweet to do, because it's a lot of fathers that sometimes they have been the primary parent, but it just hasn't been on paper. Mom has pretty much lived her life. And, my client specifically that I'm thinking about in my head, he'd raised those kids, honestly, since they were born. And mom was kind of in and out. And then every time dad wanted to talk about legitimizing them, mom would snatch them back up for like a week or two and then bring them back. So, and he tried to, go through the process several times. And then finally, when he got to me, and I was like, we're going through this, we're doing this time. And we were successful, and he has full custody, primary custody of his kids. Mom's getting visitation on a standard schedule, and they're sharing holidays. But yeah, it's possible.
Awesome. All right. Well, this was great. Thank you, Alexis. This was very helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Just to put a bow on this, if you have any questions about legitimation, custody, legal custody, whether it's in Georgia, Pennsylvania, or any of the states that we have offices, we have excellent resources on our website, or you can schedule an in-person or a virtual consult through our website as well. Don't hesitate to reach out to us to see if there's anything we can do to help you and get you pointed in the right direction.
That's right.
Well, thanks again, Alexis.
Thank you so much, Jason. Take care.